Ask nicely, and I might help you, Daniel Whitmore said without looking up, his voice calm, practiced, the kind of tone that had closed deals worth more than most people would earn in a lifetime. The black card rested between his fingers, heavy, deliberate, like an answer waiting to be accepted. Across from him, Emily Carter stood still. Not frozen, not intimidated, just still. The restaurant hummed softly around them. The low clink of glassware, the quiet murmur of conversations that never rose above a polite level. Outside, rain traced slow lines down the floor-to-ceiling windows, blurring the city lights into something distant and unreachable. Emily's hand hovered over the leather check presenter for half a second longer than necessary, then settled. Her posture didn't change. Her breathing didn't change. Only her eyes shifted, just slightly, meeting his for the first time. There was no plea in them. No urgency. Just clarity. Daniel noticed it immediately, though he didn't show it. He was used to this moment. The pause. The hesitation. The quiet calculation people made when they realized who he was, what he could do, what doors he could open. It always ended the same way. A softer voice. A careful request. Sometimes even a smile that tried a little too hard. But Emily didn't move. Earlier that evening, she had slipped through the dining room unnoticed, her steps measured, her presence efficient, almost invisible. A server like any other. That's what he had thought. Until the mistake happened. A billing error. Small on paper. Significant in consequence. The kind of thing management didn't like to fix quietly. The kind of thing that became someone's responsibility. And tonight, that someone was her. He had watched the exchange from a distance. The manager's tight smile, the lowered voice that wasn't as discreet as intended, the subtle pressure placed on her shoulders. Fix it. Handle it. Don't make it a problem. Emily had listened without interrupting, without arguing, just a slight nod. Then she turned back to the floor, back to her tables, back to him. Daniel had seen the number on the corrected bill. Enough to matter. Enough to hurt. Enough that most people would have looked for a way out. That was when he decided to wait. Not out of kindness. Not entirely. There was curiosity there. A quiet experiment. How long would it take? How long before she realized the simplest solution was sitting right in front of her? He didn't announce himself. Didn't need to. His presence carried its own introduction. The watch on his wrist caught the light. The tailored suit spoke without words. The kind of details people noticed when they needed something. So he gave her time. He let the silence stretch. Let the rain fill the space between them. Let the expectation build. And then, finally, he placed the card on the table. Not an offer. Not exactly. More like an opening move. Now, standing here, Emily looked at it. Then back at him. No flicker of relief. No softening. Just that same steady gaze. Daniel leaned back slightly, studying her as if reassessing a variable that didn't behave as expected. Somewhere behind her, a glass shattered lightly against the floor. An accident, quickly handled, but neither of them turned. The moment held. Quiet. Balanced. Waiting to tip. And for the first time in a long while, Daniel Whitmore wasn't entirely sure which way it would go. Emily did not reach for the card. Not immediately. Her fingers rested lightly on the edge of the check presenter, as if anchoring herself to something solid while everything else around her shifted. The rain outside grew heavier, tapping softly against the glass, a steady rhythm that filled the silence Daniel had created. He watched her the way he watched markets, the way he watched negotiations unfold, searching for the smallest sign of movement, the slightest crack in composure. There was always one. There had to be. But Emily simply stood there, her shoulders relaxed, her expression neutral, her presence contained. Not closed, just self-contained. Behind her, the manager glanced over again, subtle but persistent, a silent reminder of what was expected. Fix it. Do not escalate. Do not lose the customer. Emily noticed. Of course she did. Her eyes shifted briefly toward the service station, then back to the table. Back to him. Back to the card. Daniel let out a quiet breath through his nose, almost amused. It is not complicated, he said, his voice even measured. Mistakes happen. They get fixed. He tapped the card once against the table, a soft, controlled sound. You just have to ask. The words lingered, not aggressive, not loud, but weighted with assumption. Emily nodded once, a small acknowledgement, but not agreement. She opened the check presenter, glanced at the printed numbers again, then closed it with deliberate care. Her movements were precise, efficient, no hesitation. Then, slowly, she reached into the pocket of her apron. Daniel leaned forward, almost imperceptibly. There it was. The moment. The decision point. He had seen it 1,000 times. The shift from independence to necessity. The quiet surrender disguised as practicality. But when her hand came out, it was not empty. It held a worn wallet, simple, unremarkable, the edges softened by time. She placed it on the table without ceremony, opened it, and began to count. One bill, then another, neatly, calmly. No rush, no apology. Daniel's gaze sharpened. You do not have to do that, he said, this time with a trace of something else beneath the words. Not quite concern, not quite confusion, something closer to interruption. Emily did not stop counting. I know, she replied, her voice quiet but clear, each word fully formed, steady. She finished, closed the wallet, and placed the cash inside the presenter. The sound of paper against leather was soft, almost insignificant, but it landed heavier than anything else in the room. For a moment, neither of them moved. Daniel looked at the money, then at her, then at the untouched card still resting where he had placed it, offering nothing now but contrast. That is not efficient, he said finally, his tone sharper than before, as if logic itself had been challenged. Emily lifted the presenter, holding it with both hands, composed, balanced. Not everything is, she answered. No explanation followed. No justification. Just a statement, simple and complete. Somewhere behind them, a server laughed quietly at something a guest had said, the sound distant, disconnected from the tension at this table. Daniel leaned back again, studying her with a different kind of attention now. Not curiosity, not entirely. Recognition, perhaps, of something he did not often encounter. Emily met his gaze one last time, not lingering, not challenging, just present. Then she turned. Not abruptly, not dramatically, just a smooth, controlled movement as she stepped away from the table, carrying the presenter with her. The card remained where it was, untouched, unnecessary. And for the first time that evening, Daniel did not reach for it either. Emily did not look back as she walked toward the service station, her steps steady, measured, as if nothing unusual had happened, as if she had simply completed another routine task in a long shift. The check presenter remained in her hand, closed, settled, final. Behind her, the table stayed untouched. The black card still rested where Daniel had placed it, catching the low light from above, reflecting it in a quiet, almost stubborn way. He sat there for a moment longer than he intended, his fingers resting lightly against the edge of the table, his posture unchanged, but something beneath it had shifted. Not visibly, not in a way anyone else in the room would notice. But he felt it. A small disruption. A break in pattern. He reached for the card slowly, not with urgency, not with habit, but with intention, as if reconsidering something he had already decided. The weight of it felt different now. Not heavier. Just irrelevant. He turned it once between his fingers, then set it back down. Across the room, Emily placed the presenter into the register, her movements as precise as before, her attention already moving to the next task, the next table, the next order waiting to be delivered. There was no pause, no moment of reflection, no glance in his direction. It was as if the interaction had already ended for her the second she turned away. Daniel noticed that more than anything else, most people lingered. Even after they left, there was always a trace, a glance, a hesitation, a subtle return to the moment. But Emily had moved on completely. The manager approached her, speaking in a low voice, likely asking about the situation, likely expecting an explanation, perhaps even a concern. Emily answered briefly, a few quiet words, then nodded once and picked up a tray. No tension in her shoulders, no defensiveness, just completion. Daniel stood up slowly, adjusting his jacket with a practiced motion, but his attention remained fixed across the room. He had built an entire life on understanding people, on predicting reactions, on reading the smallest signals before they became decisions. It was how he stayed ahead, how he stayed in control. But this did not fit. He moved toward the exit, passing tables filled with conversations that continued uninterrupted, glasses that refilled, laughter that rose and fell without noticing anything had shifted. Near the door, he paused. Not long, just enough to look back once. Emily was at another table now, setting down a plate, her expression composed, her voice soft but clear as she spoke to a couple seated by the window. The same calm presence, the same quiet efficiency. Nothing about her suggested she had just turned down the easiest solution in the room. Nothing about her suggested she had chosen the harder path on purpose. And yet, she had. Daniel stepped outside into the rain, the cool air settling against his skin, grounding, sharp. The city moved around him, headlights cutting through the wet streets, people rushing past with umbrellas tilted against the wind. He slipped his hands into his pockets, standing still for a moment in the middle of motion. For the first time in a long while, he replayed a moment not to analyze it, not to extract advantage, but to understand it. The way she had looked at the card, the way she had counted the bills, the way she had said, "I know." No hesitation, no performance, just certainty. And that was the part he could not ignore. Because it was not that she refused his help. It was that she never needed it. And that difference stayed with him long after he walked away. The rain had not slowed by the time Daniel reached his car, but he did not get in right away. He stood there, one hand resting lightly on the door handle, watching the reflections ripple across the pavement beneath the streetlights. Everything looked distorted in the water. Familiar shapes, slightly altered. Recognizable, but not quite the same. He exhaled slowly, then opened the door and slid into the back seat, the quiet interior sealing him off from the noise outside. The driver glanced at him through the mirror. "Home, sir." Daniel did not answer immediately. His gaze remained unfocused, somewhere between the present moment and the one he had just left behind. "Not yet," he said finally, his voice low. "Drive." The car pulled away from the curb, merging into the flow of traffic, but Daniel barely noticed the turns, the stops, the movement of the city around him. His mind stayed fixed on something much smaller. A simple exchange. A few words. A choice that should have been predictable, but was not. He leaned back, loosening his tie slightly, not out of discomfort, but habit. A gesture that usually marked the end of a controlled situation. Except this one had not ended the way he expected. He replayed it again. The card. The silence. The way she had said, "I know." Not defensive. Not proud. Just certain. That was what stayed with him. Certainty without performance. He had seen confidence before. He had built empires on it. But this was different. This was not something that needed to be proven. It simply existed. The car slowed at a red light, the glow from the signal casting a brief wash of color across the interior. Daniel reached into his jacket pocket, pulling out his phone, his thumb hovering over the screen before unlocking it. He did not open his usual emails. Did not check the market updates waiting for him. Instead, he searched the name of the restaurant. A few taps. A page loaded. Reviews. Photos. A list of staff highlights posted by customers who thought they had noticed something worth sharing. His eyes scanned quickly, efficiently, filtering information the way he always did. Patterns. Mentions. Repetition. And then he saw it. A name. Emily. Mentioned once. Then again. Short comments. Nothing dramatic. Quiet but attentive. Remembers, orders perfectly. Feels like she sees everything. Daniel paused, reading the words again, not because they were impressive, but because they were consistent. Consistency meant truth more often than performance ever did. The car moved again, the city sliding past in blurred lines of light and shadow. He locked the phone and set it aside, his gaze shifting to the window. Outside, people hurried along the sidewalks, heads down, focused on their own destinations, their own concerns. No one looking up. No one noticing anything beyond what they needed. It struck him then, not as a realization, but as something quieter. Something already there, simply coming into focus. He had spent years being the solution people looked for, the answer they needed, the door they waited to be opened. And tonight, for the first time in a long time, someone had looked at that same door and walked past it. Not because it was closed, but because they did not need it. Daniel's fingers tapped once against his knee, a small, unconscious motion, as if testing the weight of that thought. Then he leaned back further into the seat, his expression settling into something more neutral, but his eyes still distant. "Turn around," he said suddenly. The driver hesitated for a fraction of a second, then nodded. "Yes, sir." The car slowed, then shifted direction, cutting back through the rain toward the place he had just left. Daniel did not explain. He did not need to. Some decisions were not about control. They were about understanding. And this was one of them. The car came to a smooth stop across the street, the restaurant glowing warm against the dark, rain still falling in steady lines that blurred the edges of everything. Daniel did not move right away. He sat there, watching through the tinted glass as people stepped in and out, coats pulled tight, umbrellas tilted, the ordinary rhythm of a night that had not changed for anyone but him. "Wait here," he said quietly, already reaching for the door before the driver could respond. The rain hit him immediately, cool and sharp, but he barely registered it as he crossed the street, his pace unhurried, deliberate. Inside, the air felt the same. Warm, controlled. The low hum of conversation, the soft lighting, the quiet precision of a place that prided itself on consistency. Nothing had shifted. Nothing had been disrupted. Except him. He stepped inside, and for a brief moment, no one noticed. Not the host at the front. Not the guests seated near the entrance. Just another man returning from the rain. But then the host looked up, recognition flickering across his face, posture straightening slightly. "Good evening, sir. Welcome back." Daniel nodded once, already scanning the room, not for a table, not for a seat, but for her. Emily was not immediately visible. The dining room moved in its usual rhythm, servers passing between tables, trays balanced, voices low and steady. For a second, it almost felt like he had imagined it. Like the moment earlier had been smaller than it felt now. But then he saw her, near the far side of the room, just beyond the window where the rain traced its quiet patterns. She stood beside a table, taking an order, her posture the same, her presence unchanged. Calm, focused, entirely within herself. Daniel paused where he stood, not approaching yet, not interrupting. He watched the way she listened, the way she nodded once, repeated the order back with precision, then moved on without lingering. No excess, no performance, just clarity in motion. It struck him again, sharper this time. She was not trying to be impressive. That was why she was. He stepped forward then, moving through the space with the same confidence that usually preceded him, but something in his pace had softened. Not slower, just less certain of the outcome. Emily turned just as he reached her section, her eyes meeting his without surprise, without reaction, as if his return had been another ordinary detail in an ordinary night. "You came back," she said, her voice even, not questioning, just acknowledging. Daniel stopped a few feet from her, the distance deliberate, respectful in a way he had not been before. "I did," he replied. A brief silence followed, not tense, not uncomfortable, just open. He glanced at the empty table nearby, then back at her. "May I sit?" It was a simple question, but it was not one he was used to asking. Emily looked at the table, then at him, considering, not his clothes, not his presence, but the question itself. Then she nodded once. "You can. No more. No less." Daniel took the seat, not at the head, not in control, just seated. He placed his hands lightly on the table, empty now, no card, no gesture, nothing offered. Emily stood across from him, not writing, not waiting, just present. "Why?" he asked finally, the word quiet, stripped of its usual edge. Not why she refused the money. Not exactly. Something deeper. Emily held his gaze for a moment, then shifted her weight slightly, her expression unchanged. "Because it was mine to fix," she said. No hesitation. No explanation beyond that. Daniel nodded slowly, absorbing the simplicity of it, the completeness. Outside, the rain continued, steady and constant, as if marking time that no longer felt quite the same. Daniel did not respond right away. Her answer did not feel incomplete. It felt final, as if there was nothing more to add, nothing hidden behind it, nothing waiting to be uncovered if he just asked the right question. Because it was mine to fix. The words stayed between them, quiet but grounded, carrying a weight that did not depend on volume. He leaned back slightly in his chair, not breaking eye contact, but not pressing forward either. For once, he was not trying to steer the conversation, not trying to shape the outcome. Most people would have handled that differently, he said after a moment, his tone softer now, more observation than challenge. Emily tilted her head just slightly, considering the statement, not rejecting it, not agreeing. "Most people have different priorities," she replied. Again, no judgment, just fact. A server passed behind her with a tray of drinks, the soft clink of glass punctuating the silence for a brief second before fading again into the background. Daniel let out a quiet breath, his fingers tapping once against the table, then stilling. He was used to hearing explanations layered with justification, people filling space with reasons designed to make their choices easier to accept. But Emily did not do that. She did not defend her decision. She did not try to make him understand it. She simply stated it and left it there. "And yours?" he asked, the question coming out more direct than he intended. Emily looked at him for a moment longer this time, as if measuring whether the question was worth answering. Then she spoke, her voice steady, unchanged. "To leave with what is still mine." Daniel's brow shifted slightly, not confusion exactly, but a recalibration. "And what is that?" he asked. Emily's gaze did not waver. "Choice." The word landed quietly, but it did not need anything else to support it. Daniel sat with that for a second, then another. Choice. It was a word he used often. In contracts, in negotiations, in strategy. But here, it meant something different. Something stripped of leverage, stripped of advantage. Just the ability to decide without pressure, without dependency. He glanced down at the table, empty except for the faint reflection of the overhead light, then back up at her. "You could have made things easier," he said, though there was no edge left in the statement, no attempt to persuade. Emily gave a small nod. "I know." The same two words, the same certainty, but this time, they did not sound like refusal. They sounded like understanding, as if she had already considered every alternative before he even spoke. A brief silence followed, longer this time, but not uncomfortable. Just still. Daniel shifted slightly in his seat, something unfamiliar settling into his posture. Not discomfort. Not exactly. More like the absence of control he had grown accustomed to filling every space. He was not leading this. And for once, he was not trying to take it back. Emily glanced toward another table, a subtle signal that her attention was needed elsewhere. Then back to him. "Is there anything you would like to order?" she asked, her tone returning to the rhythm of her work, calm, professional, unforced. Daniel almost smiled. Not fully, just a slight shift at the corner of his expression. "Coffee," he said. "Black." Emily nodded once, already turning, already moving, the moment complete in her mind before it had fully settled in his. He watched her walk away again, the same steady pace, the same quiet presence, but now he saw it differently. Not as distance, not as indifference, but as something far more deliberate. She was not walking away from him. She was walking within herself. And that was something he could not buy, could not influence, could not shortcut. The coffee arrived minutes later, placed in front of him without interruption, without unnecessary words. Just a small nod, then she moved on. Daniel wrapped his hands lightly around the cup, feeling the warmth settle into his palms. He did not drink right away. Instead, he sat there, watching the steam rise slowly into the air, fading as it climbed. And for the first time in a long time, he was not thinking about what came next. He was thinking about what had just happened and why it mattered more than anything else that night. The coffee had gone untouched for several minutes, the thin trail of steam long since faded into the air, leaving only the quiet surface of dark liquid reflecting the dim light above. Daniel sat with his hands loosely around the cup, not drinking, not moving, as if the stillness itself had become part of the moment. Around him, the restaurant continued its rhythm, steady and indifferent, plates arriving, conversations unfolding, nothing pausing, nothing waiting. But for him, something had slowed. Not the world, just his place in it. Across the room, Emily moved between tables with the same quiet precision, her presence consistent, unbroken by what had passed between them. She did not check on him more than necessary, did not return to that conversation, did not revisit the moment. It was finished in her world, completed, and that, more than anything, unsettled him in a way he could not immediately define. He was used to moments extending beyond themselves, echoing, influencing what came next. People revisited decisions. They second-guessed. They circled back. But Emily had not. She had made a choice, and then she had moved forward without looking behind her. Daniel finally lifted the cup, taking a slow sip, the bitterness settling on his tongue, grounding him in something simple, something real. No transaction, no leverage, just taste. He set it down again carefully, his gaze shifting once more to where she stood now near the window, adjusting a plate slightly before stepping back to observe it. As If balance mattered in small things just as much as large ones. A man at her table said something, and she responded with a slight nod, a few quiet words, nothing more than needed. There was no effort to impress, no attempt to draw attention, and yet, she held it anyway. Not by asking for it, by not needing it. Daniel leaned back, his posture relaxing in a way that was unfamiliar, as if he had stepped out of a role he had been playing for too long without realizing it. His phone buzzed once in his pocket, a sharp interruption in the quiet space he had settled into. Instinctively, he reached for it, glancing at the screen. A message. Urgent. Numbers. A deal waiting for confirmation. Something that would normally pull him instantly back into motion, into decision, into control. His thumb hovered over the screen. For a second, the old rhythm returned, the familiar urgency pressing forward. But then he paused. The message remained unread. The decision delayed. He slipped the phone back into his pocket without responding, his gaze returning to the room, to the quiet movement, to the simplicity of a place where nothing depended on him. It was a small act, almost insignificant, but it felt deliberate. Across the room, Emily glanced in his direction, not searching, not checking, just a brief awareness before her attention moved on again. Their eyes met for less than a second. No recognition of what had been said. No continuation of the conversation. Just presence. Equal. Separate. Complete. Daniel let out a quiet breath, something settling into place that he had not been looking for, something he did not yet fully understand. He had spent years building a world where everything responded to him, where outcomes could be shaped, influenced, controlled. But here, in this quiet corner, with a cup of coffee growing cold in front of him, he had encountered something that did not respond, did not bend, did not adjust itself to his presence. And instead of resisting it, he found himself respecting it. Not because it challenged him, but because it did not need to. And for the first time in a long while, that felt like something worth staying for, even if just a little longer. The coffee had cooled completely by the time Daniel reached for it again. But he drank it anyway, not for the taste this time, but for the motion, for something to anchor his hands while his thoughts moved in quieter, unfamiliar directions. The bitterness had flattened, softened, no longer sharp, just present, like everything else in the room. He set the cup down slowly, his fingers lingering on the rim for a second before pulling away. Across the dining floor, the pace had begun to shift. The late evening crowd was thinning, conversations shortening, chairs scraping softly against the floor as guests prepared to leave. The rhythm was changing, not abruptly, but steadily, like a tide pulling back. Emily moved within that shift without resistance, adjusting to it the same way she had handled everything else that night. Seamlessly, without drawing attention. She cleared a table near the window, stacking plates with quiet efficiency, aligning silverware before placing it into the tray, every movement measured, intentional. Daniel watched, not with curiosity anymore, but with something closer to understanding. Not complete, not yet, but closer. He stood up from his seat, not in a rush, not with the decisive energy that usually marked his movements, but with a kind of quiet intention that mirrored hers more than his own habits. The chair slid back with a soft sound, barely noticeable in the low hum of the room. Emily did not look up immediately. She finished aligning the last fork on the tray, lifted it, turned, and only then did her eyes meet his again. There was no question in her expression, no expectation, just awareness. Daniel stepped toward her, closing the distance without urgency, stopping at the same respectful space he had kept before. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence was not empty. It was settled. "I should go," he said finally, his voice even, without the weight it carried earlier, without the need to be heard beyond the space between them. Emily gave a small nod. All right. No hesitation. No attempt to extend the moment. Just acceptance. Daniel glanced briefly toward the table where he had been sitting, then back at her. "Thank you," he added, the words simple, but not automatic, not routine. Emily's gaze held his for a second longer this time, as if acknowledging something beyond the surface of the phrase. "You are welcome," she replied, her tone unchanged, but not distant. Just steady. Daniel reached into his pocket, pulling out his wallet, the familiar motion almost instinctive, but he stopped before opening it. A pause. Small, noticeable only to him. Then he placed it back. No gesture, no correction, No attempt to balance anything out. Because there was nothing to balance. That part was already done. Emily shifted the tray slightly in her hands, adjusting the weight, preparing to move on. "Good night," she said. Daniel nodded once. "Good night, Emily." He turned then, not waiting, not lingering, his steps carrying him toward the exit with a quiet certainty that felt different from before. Not control, not dominance, just clarity. The door opened, the sound of rain returning as he stepped outside, the cool air wrapping around him again, familiar now, grounding. Inside, Emily moved to the next table without looking back, setting down the tray, continuing her work, the same steady rhythm, uninterrupted. The chair he had occupied would be cleared, reset, ready for someone else. But the moment that had happened there would not be repeated. Not because it was dramatic, not because it was loud, but because it was complete. Daniel walked into the rain without rushing, without checking his phone, without reaching for anything beyond the path in front of him. And somewhere between the door and the waiting car, something subtle settled into place. Not a lesson he could define, not a strategy he could use, just a quiet understanding that some things were not meant to be taken, fixed, or influenced. Some things were meant to be respected and left exactly as they were. The rain softened as Daniel settled into the back seat, the door closing with a quiet finality that matched the night more than the usual sharp precision of his routine. The driver glanced at him once through the mirror, then returned his attention to the road without asking anything further. The car pulled away smoothly, the city. Lights stretching into long reflections across the wet pavement, each one fading as they passed. Daniel leaned back, his hands resting loosely in his lap. No phone in them this time. No movement toward the constant stream of decisions waiting for him beyond this moment. For a while, he said nothing, did nothing, just watched. Outside, people moved under umbrellas, their steps quick, their focus forward, each one carrying something unseen, something personal, something that did not need to be explained to anyone else. It struck him again, not as a sudden realization, but as something quieter, something that had been forming all night. Emily had never tried to explain herself. She had never tried to make him understand. She had simply acted, chosen, and then moved on. He closed his eyes briefly, not to rest, but to replay the smallest details, the ones that usually went unnoticed. The way she counted the bills without hesitation. The way she said, "I know." The way she never reached for what he offered, not because she could not, but because she did not need to. That distinction stayed with him, clearer now than before. The car slowed at another light, the soft red glow filling the space for a moment before shifting again. Daniel opened his eyes, looking out at the reflection of the city in the glass, his own image faintly layered over it. For years, he had believed that power was something you carried, something visible, something that changed how others moved around you. But tonight had shown him something else, something quieter, something that did not announce itself. Power that did not need to be recognized to exist. Power that did not ask for permission and did not wait for approval. The kind that simply remained. He let out a slow breath, the tension he had not noticed earlier settling out of his shoulders, leaving behind something lighter, something more grounded. His phone buzzed again in his pocket, the same persistent pull of the world he knew, the world that depended on him, responded to him, moved because of him. This time, he did not reach for it at all. Not immediately, not even after a second. He let it pass, the vibration fading into silence. Because for once, the most important thing was not what was waiting ahead. It was what had already happened, and what it meant. The car turned onto a quieter street, the noise of the